The air inside the Department of Veterans Affairs building was stale, infused with the scent of old carpet, disinfectant, and the quiet weight of bureaucracy. The kind of place where lives and sacrifices were reduced to files and forms, where men who had once charged into battle now waited in silence to prove who they were all over again. It was here, in the slow shuffle of a crowded lobby, that Walter Kane stood, a hunched but proud 82-year-old Marine Corps veteran with storm-gray eyes and trembling hands, gripping the handle of his cane with quiet dignity, his faded military jacket clean but worn, adorned with a small row of ribbons and medals that glinted faintly under the flickering fluorescent lights, especially the one pinned to his chest that always drew glances, the Medal of Honor, nestled above his heart, like a symbol of something larger than valor, something sacred. Walter had come to this building that morning not to demand anything, only to correct a clerical error in his medical benefits that had resulted in missed medication deliveries, a problem he'd tried to resolve 3 times before. But this time, he had made the journey himself despite the pain in his knees and the winter chill that made his joints ache, walking 6 blocks from the nearest bus stop after being told over the phone that matters of verification must be handled in person. The lobby was loud with murmurs and sighs, veterans of all ages waiting their turn, some in wheelchairs, some standing quietly, others holding folders thick with documents that told the stories of their lives in monochrome printouts. When Walter reached the counter, he was met by Brent Callahan, a well-groomed man in his mid-30s, crisp in a white shirt and navy blue tie, a man whose desk was clean but whose heart wasn't. Brent didn't recognize Walter, nor did he care to read the documents properly, for when his eyes landed on the Medal of Honor pinned to the old man's chest, something in his face changed, amusement twisting into suspicion, then into arrogance as he leaned forward and muttered, "That's a bold claim, sir. You do know impersonating a Medal of Honor recipient is a federal offense, right?" And, for a moment, the hum of the lobby dimmed as Walter blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. But when he straightened slightly and replied, "I earned that in Vietnam. I was with the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines." "Firebase Cunningham," Brent snorted, shaking his head like he'd just caught a child lying about a school award. And then, louder now, he said, "Well then, you won't mind if we verify this. A lot of old folks come in with stories. Doesn't he mean they're true?" And the people standing nearby began to glance over, some frowning, some uncomfortable, 1 or 2 raising their phones discreetly, sensing something unjust unfolding. Brent tapped away on his computer, sighing exaggeratedly, making remarks like, "It's always the ones with the biggest medals who cause the most trouble," before calling over a young security officer named Drew to assist with a possible impersonator. And Walter, though surprised by the escalation, stood his ground, refusing to remove the medal when asked, explaining calmly, "That medal was awarded to me by President Nixon in 1971. You can call the Pentagon and check." But Brent wasn't listening. He was too busy posturing, too proud of the power he thought he held in that moment, and in an act of reckless disrespect. He reached across the counter and grabbed the medal himself, ripping it off Walter's jacket with a sharp tug that tore the fabric, and drew audible gasps from the room, the medal falling to the floor with a cold metallic clink, and Walter's hand twitched slightly, not from age, but from decades of conditioned restraint. Silence descended like a curtain, broken only by a woman's voice whispering, "That's not right," and another man stepping forward to say, "I served in Nam, too. I remember his name." But Brent ignored them, gesturing for security, to remove Walter from the premises, just as the double doors at the back of the lobby burst open and a commanding voice rang out, "Is this how we treat our heroes now?" And in walked General Marcus A. Rawlings, 4 stars gleaming on each shoulder, his face like granite, eyes burning with disbelief as he surveyed the scene, flanked by 2 aides and a civilian journalist shadowing him for a story on VA reforms. General Rawlings paused, then stepped forward and said, "Sergeant Major Walter Kane?" And Walter looked up, confused, nodding once, and the general's posture shifted instantly to one of respect, his heel clicking as he saluted sharply, his voice booming, "This man is a living legend. You disgrace him, you disgrace every soldier who ever served." And the room erupted into hushed whispers, phones now held openly, recording what was quickly becoming a reckoning. Brent, pale and sweating, stammered that he was just following procedure. But the general cut him off with a glare so fierce it could cut steel, bending down to retrieve the medal from the floor and holding it in both hands before returning it to Walter, saying, "This should never touch the ground, not in my country." And as the tension broke, the crowd began to clap slowly, then louder, as the general turned to Brent and declared, "You're done here, effective immediately. Until a full investigation is conducted, you are relieved of all duties." And as security officers turned their attention to escorting Brent out, Walter stood still, overwhelmed, the world suddenly moving too fast, until a boy no older than 10 approached him, eyes wide, and whispered, "Sir, I want to be like you when I grow up." And Walter smiled faintly, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder, not with pride, but with a quiet humility that only those who've seen the worst of war can carry, because Walter had never wanted recognition, only respect, only the dignity to walk into a government building and not be doubted, not be humiliated, not be stripped of the very honor that had cost him pieces of his soul. The general escorted Walter personally to the benefits office, where his case was resolved in minutes, his medications reinstated, and his jacket mended by a young assistant who insisted it was the least she could do. Outside, a news van had arrived, and within hours the footage of the incident went viral, sparking outrage across the country, igniting conversations about how veterans are treated, about how age should never equate to invisibility, about how honor once earned must always be honored. Letters poured in from across the nation. Schools invited Walter to speak. The president himself sent a handwritten apology. And Brent, who had once sat so high behind his desk, now found himself the subject of public shame and formal charges of misconduct. But Walter never gloated, never spoke ill of the man who tried to tear him down. Instead, he continued to walk his dog every morning, visit the families of fallen comrades, and attend military funerals, even for those he never knew, because that's what Marines do. They remember, they show up, and they never stop serving. And though his name was now known across the country to Walter, the only thing that mattered was that young boy's voice, that simple sentence, "I want to be like him," because it meant the next generation still understood what true service looked like. Not medals, not glory, but courage in silence, strength in humility, and the ability to stand tall when the world tries to knock you down. And so, in the twilight of his life, Walter Kane became not just a name etched in military records, but a symbol of what it means to fight not just on the battlefield, but in the quiet, overlooked corners of society where respect must still be earned daily, where battles take the form of broken systems and dismissive glances, and where heroes sometimes walk with canes and stories the world nearly forgot. Until Justice walked into the room wearing 4 stars and said, "Not on my watch." And the world finally stood still to remember the man who never stopped standing for them.